The old man never asked her name at first, and she never asked his either, because some connections grow stronger in silence, and every morning as the sun barely lifted itself over the cracked rooftops of the neighborhood, she would knock twice on his door, soft knocks, the kind that didn't demand attention but hoped for it, and when the door opened, he would always look surprised, as if kindness itself had caught him off guard again, his thin hands trembling as he accepted the plate wrapped in a faded cloth, warm eggs, bread she had helped her mother make, sometimes fruit when they could afford it, and he would always say thank you the same way, slow and deliberate, like the words carried weight he didn't want to drop, and she would smile, bright and fearless, then sit on the steps while he ate, swinging her legs, telling him about school, about how the teacher said she was good at reading, about how kids laughed at her shoes but she didn't mind, because shoes didn't decide who you were, and the old man would listen with an intensity that felt strange for such simple stories, his eyes following every word like they mattered, like she mattered, and sometimes his gaze would drift past her to the street, scanning it with a habit too sharp for an ordinary old man, a habit shaped by years when noticing details meant staying alive, and on those mornings he would go quiet, his jaw tightening for just a second before softening again as she laughed, pulling him back into the present. Back into the role of a lonely elder instead of whatever he once was, and as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the neighbors began to notice, how the girl never missed a morning, rain or shine, how the old man, once withdrawn and almost invisible, now stood a little straighter, how his porch stayed swept, how the small American flag beside his door, once faded and ignored, was suddenly clean and upright, and whispers started, some kind, some cruel, people wondering why a child wasted food on a man who gave nothing back, why her mother allowed it when money was already tight, but the girl didn't hear those whispers, or maybe she did and chose not to care, because every morning when she knocked, the old man's eyes softened in a way the world rarely allowed black girls to see directed at them, a look of respect, of gratitude, of recognition, and one morning she arrived later than usual, breathless, apologizing, explaining her mother had been sick, and for the first time the old man reached out, gently resting a hand on her shoulder, the touch light but steady, and said, "You don't owe me anything," his voice rough, like it had been used to shouting orders once, and she frowned, confused, and replied, "I know," as if the idea of owing kindness was strange to her, and that was the moment something shifted inside him, something long buried under decades of discipline, loss, and silence. Because he realized this child wasn't feeding him out of pity or habit, she was feeding him out of love, pure and untrained, and that kind of love had once been the very thing he had sworn to protect, even if it cost him everything, and from that day on he began preparing for her arrival, sitting closer to the door, timing her steps, hiding the small wince of pain in his knee so she wouldn't worry, and sometimes, when she wasn't looking, he would stand at attention for just a heartbeat after she left, back straight, chin lifted, saluting not a flag or a rank but a little girl with a breakfast plate, and unknown to her, unknown to the neighbors, unknown even to her own mother, every knock on that door was stirring echoes of a life the world believed long finished, a life that had once moved entire units, altered missions, and saved lives under fire, and somewhere far away, in a quiet office lined with medals and old photographs, a file bearing the old man's name, long thought closed, had been reopened, setting in motion events that would soon roll like thunder down the street where a little girl still believed breakfast was just breakfast, and kindness was just normal, not knowing that the uniformed men who would soon arrive at her door were not coming to take something away, but to reveal a truth powerful enough to change how everyone saw her forever. The morning the military officers arrived, the girl had just set down a plate of warm toast and eggs on the old man's porch, humming softly to herself, the smell of breakfast mingling with the crisp air, when a sharp knock came at the gate, 3 heavy, commanding raps that made her heart jump. The old man stiffened instantly, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, and she looked up to see men in dark uniforms with polished boots and insignias she didn't recognize, their expressions serious but not unkind, and instinctively she stepped forward, gripping the edge of the plate, while the old man slowly rose, a hand trembling on his cane, and one officer spoke, his voice steady but gentle, saying, "Mr. Harris? We need to speak with you." Confusion crossed her young face, but before she could ask what was happening, The old man's jaw tightened, and in a tone both commanding and haunted, he said, "Not here. Let's move inside." The girl followed silently, curiosity mixed with fear, as the men stepped in, eyes scanning the room filled with faded photographs, medals tucked in drawers, letters that smelled faintly of gunpowder and paper, and the old man's story began to unfold, not to the girl yet, but to the officers, the story of a man who had served in secret operations, missions that had saved countless lives but had left him invisible to the world he protected, a man who had buried his past and tried to vanish. Quietly, carrying the weight of both heroism and regret, and as the officers exchanged solemn nods, it became clear that their arrival wasn't random, it was recognition, an attempt to honor a man the world had forgotten, and then the girl, eyes wide, looked at him and asked, "Are you a hero?" The old man's lips twitched, a faint smile breaking through decades of stoicism, and he knelt slightly, pulling her into a gentle embrace, whispering, "I suppose, in some ways, I am, thanks to you." Her small hands gripped his coat, confused yet proud, as the officers handed him an envelope, official and ceremonial, containing medals, commendations, and letters from the government, and the girl finally understood, the breakfasts she had brought, the stories she had shared, the simple act of care, had reminded the world that even heroes need to be seen, even heroes need love. The neighborhood watched as the officers stood respectfully, the girl by the old man's side, and the once invisible man now stood tall, recognized, and alive in a way that the world had denied him for too long, while the girl's smile, radiant and fearless, became the true heart of the story, proving that kindness can awaken forgotten greatness, and as cameras, phones, and neighbors recorded this moment, the old man looked down at her and said softly,